So, picture this, an entire country dealing with a massive power crisis. The government is scrambling for answers, and then a company known for making textiles steps up to help keep the lights on. It sounds kind of wild, right? Well, this is the story of Nishat Power and its really surprising role in Pakistan's energy history.
Okay, let's kick things off with a huge question. What do you actually do when your country is, well, running out of power? And I'm not talking about a quick blackout here. I mean a full-blown national crisis, one that brings daily life to a grinding halt. That's exactly the situation Pakistan was in back in the mid-2000s.
So, before we even get to the solution, we really need to understand just how bad this problem was. This wasn't just some minor inconvenience. We're talking about a crisis that was literally holding the entire nation back.
All right, in the mid-2000s, this one number pretty much says it all. Only about 65 to 70% of Pakistan's population had access to electricity. Just let that sink in for a second. That means nearly a third of the whole country was literally in the dark. No power for homes, for schools, for businesses.
So what happens when you have that kind of shortage? Well, the result was something called load shedding. Basically, these were planned, rolling blackouts. It was the only way to keep the entire national grid from just completely collapsing. For everyday people and businesses, this meant hours without power every single day. It just ground productivity and normal life to a complete standstill.
Okay, so the government realized, hey, we can't fix this by ourselves. They needed a totally new strategy, one that could bring in fresh cash and, new players to the game. And this led to a really fundamental shift in how Pakistan approached generating power.
And the government's big solution was this new framework built around a pretty simple idea: independent power producers, or IPPs. So instead of the state having to build every single power plant, the government basically said, hey, private companies, come on in and do it. The deal was they would build the plants, and then they'd sell the electricity they generated back to the national grid.
Now, this wasn't just some vague concept they were throwing around. It was made official in something called the Power Policy of 2002. And this policy was super important because it created all the incentives and the legal stuff needed to convince private companies that, yeah, investing in Pakistan's energy sector was a smart, long-term business move.
And wow, this new model completely flipped the old system on its head. Suddenly, things like ownership, funding, and this is the big one, risk, were no longer just on the government's shoulders. It was a really strategic move, right? The whole point was to get power plants built way faster by bringing in private money and private know-how.
So this new policy basically threw the doors wide open for new players. And one of the most important companies to walk right through that door was Nishat Power Limited, or as we'll call it, NPL.
So, Nishat Power, or NPL, was a direct result of this new policy. And what's fascinating is who was behind it, the Nishat Group. Now, this was a massive Pakistani company, but they were famous for textiles, not power plants. But they saw a huge business opportunity and just jumped right in. Their plan was ambitious too: build a 200-megawatt power station right in the heart of the country's industrial region.
And listen to this. They moved fast. The company was formed in 2007, and by mid-2010, the plant was fully up and running, pumping power into the grid. I mean, that kind of speed was exactly what the IPP policy was designed for. And they kept evolving. Later on in 2021, they even renegotiated their agreements with the government to adapt to new economic realities and changing energy costs.
All right, so what did NPL actually build? How does this place generate all that power that was so desperately needed? Come on, let's take a look inside. Okay, so the heart of this plant isn't what you might expect, like one single giant turbine. Instead, it's a series of 11 super sophisticated reciprocating engines. And this wasn't local tech either. It came all the way from Wärtsilä, a world-famous engineering firm from Finland. It just goes to show you the kind of international teamwork that went into these projects.
But the real magic trick here is the clever engineering. NPL uses what's called a combined cycle system. So the engines burn fuel to generate power, right? But instead of just letting all that hot exhaust escape into the air, which is a huge waste, they capture it. That heat is used to boil water, which creates steam, and that steam powers a second turbine. It's like getting bonus electricity for free just by using heat that would have been lost anyway.
So what does all this fancy tech add up to? Well, while the plant has a total capacity of 200 megawatts, its net dependable capacity, that's the amount it can reliably send to the grid day in and day out, is a really impressive 195 megawatts. That is a huge and, more importantly, a consistent boost of power.
All right, so fast forward more than a decade. Now we can kind of step back and look at the big picture. what's been the real, lasting impact of a company like Nishat Power?
Well, NPL's impact was huge, no question. For over a decade, it directly helped fill that critical energy gap in the country. It also became this amazing case study, proving that a company from a totally different industry, textiles, could successfully pivot into something as complex as energy. And they did all this while dealing with some major headaches, like the infamous circular debt, which is basically this tangled mess of debt where power producers can wait a really long time to get paid by the government.
You know, a quote from the company's CEO really puts it all into perspective. He said, "Mobilizing and generating affordable energy resources is one of the key challenges for any nation in today's world." And that kind of says it all, doesn't it? This wasn't just about making money, it was about tackling one of the biggest hurdles for any developing nation, getting reliable and affordable power to its people.
And that brings us to a final pretty big thought. NPL was, without a doubt, a solution for its time. It was a super efficient plant that met a desperate need. But today, the whole world is talking about shifting away from fossil fuels and towards renewables. So that leaves us with a question, right? What is the future for efficient but fossil-fueled power plants just like this one? How do they adapt? And what role will they play in the next chapter of the world's energy story?